how much of embryo quality is due to the egg and how much is due to the sperm. And this was Sean's response. Both parents contribute half the DNA. So in that sense, it is 50-50. But as women age, most chromosomal problems tend to come from the egg. Sperm are made fresh every few months, while eggs sit paused for decades in meiosis, the special type of cell division that creates egg and sperm cells. And that long pause makes the chromosome handling machinery more prone to errors, especially with older age. A chromosome, in case you need a little refresher, is a long organized structure made of DNA and proteins that carries your genetic information. Are you somebody with endometriosis going through IVF? Perhaps you've had a failed cycle or a failed transfer. Maybe you've been told your embryo quality isn't optimal, or perhaps you're told something is off with implantation. In today's video, I'm sharing Sean's responses to the most popular questions asked by endometriosis sufferers about all things embryo quality implantation and IVF. Sean, otherwise known as Embryoman, is the creator of an IVF science news site, Remembryo, which he's been running since 2018. He's a former embryologist with a background in cancer research. You can find more on Sean at Embryoman Official on Instagram and on his website, which I will link for you in the show notes below. The website is also where you'll find Sean's popular e-newsletter. As a former embryologist, Sean provided his expert input on today's questions. Before we jump in, please hit subscribe and give this video a like. Now let's jump into the video. So the first question I asked Sean was, what determines the quality of an embryo? Embryo quality is based on how the embryo looks under the microscope at each stage. For day 3, this corresponds to the number of cells and percentage of fragmentation. And for day 5, it refers to how large the blastocyst is and how many cells are in the inner cell mass and trophectoderm. Inner cell mass, which I will use a few times in this video, and I'm going to short form it to ICM, is a group of cells found inside a very early embryo. It represents the cluster of cells that will eventually form the entire baby, while the outer layer becomes the placenta. The trophectoderm is the outer layer of cells that does not become the baby, but they do become the support systems needed for pregnancy. Better quality embryos tend to have higher chances of implanting, but embryos of all qualities can still lead to healthy live births. So the second question I asked Sean is, how do you assess embryo quality in the lab? This was Sean's response. At the cleavage stage, embryologists look at the number of cells, fragmentation, and how evenly sized the cells are. At the blastocyst stage, they grade the embryo's expansion and the quality of the inner cell mass and trophectoderm. For example, a blastocyst that's just starting to hatch would be a 5 for its expansion. And if it had a large inner cell mass and a trophectoderm with a lot of cells, it would get an A grade for each, so a 5AA. On the screen, you will see a little cheat sheet Sean put together to make sense of this. All right, next question was, what do the terms day 3 and day 5 blastocyst mean? These describe how many days have passed since fertilization. Day 3 embryos are still in the cleavage stage for individual cells visible, while day 5 embryos have formed blastocysts with an inner cell mass and trophectoderm. Okay, the next question I asked is, when they say an embryo is poor quality, what does that actually mean for its chances of success? And this was Sean's response. So poor quality embryos generally have lower live birth rates compared to good quality embryos, but multiple studies show they can still implant and lead to healthy births. Some studies show that they could have about half the chance of live births compared to good quality embryos. Okay, the next question was a little bit more action oriented, and I asked, is there anything people pursuing IVF can do before IVF to help improve embryo quality? So this was Sean's response. The evidence is generally lower quality, but some research links healthier lifestyle choices and certain supplements like CoQ10 to better egg and sperm outcomes, while smoking, heavy drinking, poor diet, and endocrine disrupting exposures may be linked to worse quality. As a side note here, if you do want to learn a little bit more about endocrine disrupting chemicals, I'll link to my video on EDCs. Because embryo quality depends on both the egg and the sperm, anything that affects either can play a role, but overall more data is needed. Now, based on my own research and past videos that I've created on this channel, so this is not a response provided by Sean, there are a few key areas that I would encourage you to consider. The first is optimizing gut and immune health. Your gut is your largest immune organ. A healthy gut and microbiome can help regulate inflammation and support fertility. A few key things under this umbrella to focus on, including a plant-centric high fiber diet, and you could also consider more in-depth gut and or vaginal microbiome testing if it's warranted based on symptoms and or if you have unexplained infertility or repeat IVF failures. The next thing is an anti-inflammatory diet. So prioritize lean proteins, colorful veggies, omega-3s, and fiber. Limit your processed food intake, sugar intake, and alcohol intake, of course. In terms of supplements, CoQ10, NAC, omega-3s, and antioxidants may help support egg quality. In terms of your lifestyle, definitely make efforts to manage stress, and this can look a little different for everybody. Get good quality sleep and move your body regularly. And when it comes to testing, you could consider advanced testing for the vaginal or uterine microbiome. You could request immune marker testing, thyroid function testing, and these would be particularly helpful if you're a more complex case or if you have unexplained infertility or repeat IVF failures. All right, the next question I asked Sean was how much of embryo quality is due to the egg and how much is due to the sperm? And this was Sean's response. Both parents contribute half the DNA. So in that sense, it is 50-50. But as women age, most chromosomal problems tend to come from the egg. Sperm are made fresh every few months, while eggs sit paused for decades in meiosis, the special type of cell division that creates egg and sperm cells. And that long pause makes the chromosome handling machinery more prone to errors, especially with older age. A chromosome, in case you need a little refresher, is a long organized structure made of DNA and proteins that carries your genetic information. The next question I asked Sean is how do you decide which embryo to transfer first? And this was Sean's response. Embryos are ranked by their grades, with good quality embryos generally transferred first because they have higher chances of implanting. Clinics may also prioritize day 5 embryos over day 6 or 7 since faster developing embryos tend to perform better. All right, the next question was, does embryo grading predict pregnancy outcomes accurately, or are there any exceptions? So this was Sean's response. Grades help rank embryos and correlate with success rates, but a patient's individual chance of a live birth is dependent on more than just the grade. Maternal age, aka the age of the eggs, is probably the strongest predictor of success rates because of its strong link to chromosomal errors / aneuploidy. Aneuploidy refers to an embryo, egg, sperm, or cell that has the wrong number of chromosomes, either too many or too few. When everything is equal between two patients, grade becomes a pretty reliable predictor, but in real life, the patient's age, history, diagnosis, and the clinic's individual success rates all influence the outcome, and more is also considered within this question. All right, the next question was, what's the difference between a normal, mosaic, and abnormal embryo? So a normal embryo, called euploid, has the correct 46 chromosomes, while an abnormal embryo, aneuploid, has too many or too few and usually won't implant or will miscarry. A mosaic embryo has a mix of normal and abnormal cells and tends to have success rates that are between euploid and aneuploid embryos. All right, when it comes to PGT-A testing, is it always necessary? PGT-A is a test where a few cells are biopsied from the trophectoderm of a blastocyst and genetically sequenced to determine whether the embryo has the correct number of chromosomes. It can help select embryos for women over 35 or those with recurrent miscarriage, but it isn't always useful for younger women or for people with only a small number of embryos. Now, speaking of testing, the next question was around limitations of genetic testing. Can results ever be wrong or inconclusive? Sean's response was that because PGT-A analyzes only 5 to 10 trophectoderm cells, the biopsy doesn't always reflect the entire embryo, especially since those cells aren't from the inner cell mass that becomes the baby. The results of the biopsy itself are usually accurate, but whether that small sample truly represents the whole embryo is less certain. Aneuploid and euploid embryos usually give the same result on repeat testing, while mosaics often don't because they're a mix of normal and abnormal cells. Inconclusive results can happen if the quality of the biopsy sample isn't high or if the biopsy piece isn't properly recovered or stored before genetic sequencing. All right, my next question was around what does the lab environment do to help embryos thrive? So Sean's response was that high-performing labs control air quality with HEPA filtration and positive air pressure. They use heated microscope stages and low oxygen culture conditions, and they rely on filtered mixed gases to support embryo development. Many labs also off-gas plasticware before use and maintain strict temperature and handling conditions during procedures. In terms of freezing and thawing embryos, these days embryos are frozen using vitrification, which rapidly cools them to negative 196 degrees Celsius to avoid ice crystal formation and gives them very high survival compared to older slow freeze methods. So generally there's about a 95% and above survival associated with this. And in terms of accuracy and ensuring that embryos belong to certain individuals or certain couples, Sean's response was that everything in the lab is labeled with patient names or identifiers, and some clinics also use electronic tracking system to prevent mix-ups. Before any biopsy, insemination, transfer, or freezing step, two embryologists double witness the patient details and samples to ensure accuracy. All right, my next question was around the average number of embryos that typically result per cycle. So Sean's response was that it depends on the number of eggs retrieved, of course. One study found that the median number of eggs retrieved was 18 for women 30 or younger, dropping to 8 for women 44 and older. From those numbers, people typically end up with roughly 3 to 7 usable blastocysts per cycle, with more embryos in younger patients and fewer as age increases. All right, my last question was around, are there any myths or misconceptions about IVF and embryos that could be helpful to clear up? So Sean's response was that most IVF add-ons are based on low quality evidence. The European Fertility Group, European Society of Human Reproduction and Embryology, recently reviewed 27 of them and recommended only a few, including embryo glue for fresh transfers, artificial oocyte activation, and artificial sperm activation. A couple of others, such as screening hysteroscopy and sperm microfluidics like Zymot, can be considered, but many popular add-ons such as ERA, immune testing or treatments, time-lapse, PGT-A, PICSI, PRP, dietary supplements, and assisted hatching were generally not recommended for routine use because of limited evidence or concerns about safety or effectiveness. Guidance from the Italian group SIFES-MR, translated to Italian Society of Fertility and Sterility and Reproductive Medicine, mostly matched the European guidelines. They support only a few add-ons in specific situations. For example, embryo glue for select patients, limited use of hysteroscopy, selective ITSI, and targeted PGT-A, and do not support ERA or assisted hatching. Most remaining add-ons were placed in a research-only category. This doesn't mean add-ons never work, but the current research isn't strong enough to give a clear or conclusive answer. Another misconception that Sean wanted to clear up is that poor quality embryos cannot lead to healthy births. Multiple studies show they can, although the risk of pregnancy loss may be higher. Mosaic embryos can also lead to live births, with some studies even showing outcomes close to euploid embryos for low-level mosaics. Thank you so much for watching today's video. Let me know in the comments below if you learned something new. I've included Sean's socials, links, and website for you in the show notes below, so you can get on his awesome e-newsletter list as well, and I will see you in the next video.